Ladies and gentlemen, this is Philip Krupp welcoming you to your Keep in Touch program, the show that brings you unique interviews and conversations. Our host, George Douth, will be introducing us to guests famed in the world of entertainment. And now, let's join George Douth at the Manhattan apartment of a good friend of his, the witty and charming star of stage, screen, and television, Arlene Francis.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Mrs. Martin Gable. Yes, our very own Arlene Francis. Good evening, Arlene.
Good evening, George, dear. That was a glorious introduction. Beautiful. I couldn't have written it better myself. In fact, I did write it.
It is really so nice of you to put down the welcome mat for us this evening, inviting us into your home.
I'm very glad you could come. I'm glad you could come at this particular time because we're having some people in later on. Therefore, we've got a lot of flowers in the house. That always makes the house look prettier, warmer, and cozier, don't you think?
It certainly does, and I like the color scheme and the decor of the room we're broadcasting from this evening.
You know, I did, my house in the country is so warm and welcoming. Every time I go into it, I tried to fix the apartment I have in the city so that you feel you're coming into a country house, too. And I have this kind of pink and green floral wallpaper that is French wallpaper, and I think it does make the room sort of sunny and gay, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
And the colors.
And I like that picture hanging up over the sofa.
It was done by an artist who has since died, and I think a very talented man. His name was Nano de Groot, and it's a faceless woman, I must tell our audience. He's painted it. He's rather a modern painter, but it's a faceless woman, and somehow you put whatever face you see in your own mind's eye into the picture, you know, to fill it out. And it's sort of interesting that you do that. It's absolutely a blank face, but don't you find that you can see the lady just the same?
Very, very interesting indeed. Arlene, as a star of stage, screen, radio, do you have any preference?
No, television has been very, very good to me. After all, I've been on television since it started, and I think Blind Date was one of the first shows on television. And then, of course, What's My Line, which has been on. We're in our 16th year now. That's practically the granddaddy of the quiz shows. And I'm very grateful to television. It's gone 52 weeks a year for many, many years now. But it's not quite as rewarding as the theater, because there you have the live audience, as you know, George, there to react to you. And it's the caviar of the acting profession. You know, one may rehearse diligently for weeks and care terribly about a play or a part, and then the critics can do away with you in a night if they don't happen to agree with your point of view. So that it's a very tough road to hoe. I don't suggest it as a way of life for most people. You have to be dedicated to it to want to keep it up. But I've had the crutch of television and radio all these years.
Home for 2 or 3 years.
Oh, 4
years.
Home was on the air 4 years. That was when Pat Weaver thought of the Today, Home, and Tonight idea. And Today and Tonight have remained on very successfully. Home was a very expensive show to do because we had that enormous circular studio and we had to have all sorts of setups and so forth and variety. And there were 100 people on the staff alone. And, of course, that isn't required in shows like Today and Tonight.
I should imagine, Arlene, that you have interviewed literally thousands of people from every walk of life over the years on Home and, of course, on your daily radio program here in New York City.
I enjoy interviewing people. I'm sure you do, because you kind of get your education that way, in a sense. I know that I interview many authors, and it just necessitates my having to read their books because I won't interview anybody that I haven't read. You know, you've learned quite a lot if you have to read everything from the Ian Fleming novels to the treatise by Lasky in England, you know, so that you really, you just simply have to educate yourself when you're doing that kind of work, and it's been marvelous. I got my PhD through my interview programs.
When did you start in show business?
My family was terribly against my being in the theater. I have the most usual background, not unusual, usual. I went to a convent. I had a father that thought the theater was a terrible place for a girl. A mother that kept saying, but the most important thing are manners and speech, and so I think we ought to let her at least study that, and that doesn't mean she'll be on the stage. It'll just mean that will help her with the graces and so forth. And so they were very much against it, but radio seemed like a legitimate business to my father. That didn't seem quite so outrageous as the theater. So he allowed me to go into radio, and then I went into the theater through summer stock, and then finally got a break with George Abbott, which is a way that many very young people in the theater have gotten a break, of course. So I've managed to keep alive all three of the professions through the years, because even when I'm doing radio and television shows that are on regularly, I try to do summer stock when I have vacation. I don't take a vacation, I work. Or winter stock in the winter time, and tape my programs ahead, as you very often have to tape yours, George. And then in the summer, What's My Line is taped for 6 weeks. So that allows all of us to take a 6-week vacation,
yes,
during which time I work.
Yes. Well, you know, when you first started in radio, you just mentioned that was the medium in which you started. What show did you do? What shows were on?
Well, don't talk like that. You said make me sound like an antique. Big Sister and I can't even remember the names of them anymore.
Well, I remember
Betty and Bob I did. There seemed to be endless ones. And then, of course, I did the first quiz show. What's My Name was the name of it. And that
what
was
that? Was that like What's My Line?
It was, it was a forerunner of What's My Line. It was a little different. There were 4 questions asked to people that were chosen in the audience. And I pretended to be a famous personality, and then I would shed a little light on myself, you know, and then they would have to say, and then I would say, what's my name, after the first question. If they got it, if they knew who I was from the first, which is rather an oblique question, they would get a $10 prize. Can you believe it, the way it's gone up since then, the inflation that's happened?
So you talk about age. You know, I have been with What's My Line. Many of our listeners know I'm associated with Goodson Taubman for the same number of years, I guess, as you have. What is it, 15 now, or whatever?
Yes, we're about 16.
But unfortunately, women don't know how to retain or keep the youth that you women do. And I would just like to ask you now, what is your secret? How is it you look so beautiful and attractive, and we men get old fast, and I'm getting old faster by the minute?
You look like a baby, George, as everybody knows that's seen you. But I have no recipe for anything except being interested in what's going on around me. I think if you care terribly about life and its pursuits, and you have a certain joy in being alive, that you just look better most of the time. There is no reason to get kind of bent over and crotchety and have creaky joints and split hair ends and bad complexions, because there are too many cosmetic things that will help us to look better. There are certainly massage and all kinds of facial cosmetics and all kind of hair treatments, so that people don't have to look older. Naturally, we all get older, but I mean, we don't have to look poorly, may I say. We can all look well. And that's part of the glow of living. And if you have that, that's the whole secret, I think.
You're 100% right, Arlene. I think part of the glow is the knowledge one acquires as they get on in years, because that puts a halo of youth around you. And the young people flock to people like yourself, like Dr. Margaret Mead, because you are in the know, because you're so active day in and day out doing 1,000,001 different things, and I don't know how you find the time to do them all, Arlene.
Well, I enjoy doing them all. That's the secret.
What was your first stage play? Do you recall?
Boy, you probably do. I just don't know that I do. It's so long ago. Oh, Doughgirls. Well, it wasn't my first stage play, but it was my first hit, and that was during the war. I played a Russian sniper in that, and it was a marvelous part, and I played it with a Russian accent and a Russian costume, while all the other girls in the show, Arlene Whalen and Virginia Field and Doris Nolan, they were all dressed in beautiful Hattie Carnegie clothes, and I had to wear this terrible uniform of the Russian army.
And the Look magazine said of that particular hit, Doughgirl, that we are talking about, that you walked away with the show.
Oh, well, don't you believe it?
Knowing Arlene Francis, I know that you walked away with the show. You have done about, what, 21 Broadway productions?
I guess I've done even more than that now. I don't keep track of how many. There was a time when I had a bracelet that had on it, you know, those charm bracelets that have every play that you've been in, but it was a flop bracelet. And every play I was in closed. The only really big hits I've been in was Doughgirls, the first one, and then, of course, Once More with Feeling was a big hit that I did with Joe Cotton.
Were you in with the Goldbergs?
No.
I know Joseph Cotton was.
No. Was Joe in that? I didn't know that.
Yes.
No, Joe and I worked together in Once More with Feeling, but we had previously worked together with Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater. We were part of that nucleus of that first group that Orson put together. Joe Cotton and I were part of that, so that's how I knew Joe. We were both poor and struggling and young at the time.
When did you first meet that wonderful husband of yours? Martin Gable, of course, I speak of, as our listeners are well aware. Incidentally, he welcomed me when I came in this evening. He was in here.
He has been, of course, very active in the acting field himself. This last year, he was in his first musical, Baker Street, and he was rather hilarious about that. He was keeping mufflers around his neck to be sure that his dulcet tones would be kept intact.
He has a wonderful speaking voice,
He does.
very resonant and deep.
Yes. Well, when I first met him, he was doing Big Sister. I was only beginning then, and he was already the star of this particular radio show. I think his name was Dr. John Wayne. Some of our older listeners who used to hear Big Sister will remember Martin from that. And that's when I used to get to know him so well. That's how it all happened. And we have a glorious son, 18 years old, at Harvard, and I'm very proud of indeed.
You are also an authoress.
Oh, well, we don't count that. I'm not really a writer.
And the book, That Certain Something, The Magic of Charm, published by Julian Messner and Company.
Yes,
Did I pronounce that right?
That's right. That's right. Julian Messner and Company. Well, that's really nothing. That's a book I wrote about 5 years ago. Well, maybe more now. I can't even remember. But I only wrote it because she had, Mrs. Messner had called me to ask me if I would do a book on charm, and I said I thought that was a terrible assumption. I wouldn't dream of doing a book on charm. It sounds like I am saying I'm adorable. If you just do what I say, you too will be adorable. But then she said, no, well, let's try and think of some angle for you to write it. And so I thought about it a little, and I thought of all the people that I had met the 4 years I had done the home show that you've talked about, and the many, many people I've interviewed, and what made the difference in people, what attitudes did they have, what kind of behavior did they show that made them draw themselves to you, or you are drawn to them, rather, more than other people. And so I wrote the book from that standpoint, and I'm happy to say it was on the bestseller list for a while. And
it was indeed.
It's in paperback.
Arlene, well, what are the attitudes of people today? Do you have any comment on the young people?
There is always a rebellion in the ranks of youth because they want to break the bonds that are holding on to them. I disapprove myself of the marching and the picketing. I think if the laws of the country are a certain thing, you have to obey the laws, and beyond that, you can do everything. You can write your congressman, you can write to your president, you can do whatever you want if you disapprove of the laws that are the laws of the land. We live in a democracy that says you can change them if there is popular approval of changing them, and I'm for that, but not for overt rebellion. I think it is, I don't think it's any good on either side. I'm not saying, I don't care whether it is the man that is marching against the war in Vietnam or the man that is saying, why shouldn't we go to Vietnam? I say that both sides should act according to the laws of the land. That's all I say. Now, the rebellion of youth is indistinguishable today from what it was hundreds of years ago. It is only that today our communications are better and we see more and that we have grown up more. And it is certainly obvious that we're going to know more about the rebellion of the youth of today. And I don't think it's a terribly unhealthy thing. My own son is very, very opposed to the articles that are written about juvenile delinquency and about the Berkeley campus incidents and so forth, because he feels that these things are very harmful, these articles that are written, because they separate the generations even farther. And that is what he says is the most dangerous thing that is happening in our age, according to my 18-year-old son.
I wonder if you have any thoughts as to how young people can best express themselves on the college campus.
Well, they can best express themselves by fulfilling the job that is at hand for them. They have 4 years of college. They have an opportunity to grow enormously by really caring about what they're studying. If their families have sacrificed in any way to send them to college, they certainly should at least pay them the respect of trying to accomplish something themselves, because only through enriching themselves are they going to amount to anything in the future. And if if people are not sacrificing, I certainly can't say that my husband and I had to sacrifice to send Peter to college. We would be disappointed not for ourselves, but for him. He has a long, I hope, rich, full life ahead of him. And if he isn't going to take advantage of the years that he has of acquiring knowledge, of being inquisitive and acquisitive, he will not be equipped for the world of the future. We're all very insane not to do our studying and our homework.
You have so many hobbies, and I don't know how you manage to incorporate these hobbies into your daily work. Radio, motion picture, 1, 2, 3 I speak of, which I saw, Arlene, and I really, with Jimmy Cagney, that was delightful.
Yes,
that was a
cute
couple of years ago, wasn't it?
That was 3 years ago. Well, no, it was 1962. And Thrill of It All I did a couple of years ago.
Yes.
But I'm not a motion picture performer. I just happened to do those 2 pictures, that's all. I tell you the truth, George, I work so hard, but that work is my hobby, that's all. I find, there are 2 kinds of people. One is the kind for which work is pleasure, and the other kind, work is work and pleasure is pleasure separately. For me, my work is my pleasure, so I have my holiday when I'm doing something that pleases me work-wise. I do little things. I have a house in the country I adore. I cook a little. I love to dabble around in paints a little. I antique furniture a little. I do all these things a little. I'm not a master of any of these crafts. I just enjoy them.
Well, I think perhaps a remark made by one of your friends describes you best, Arlene. If I may quote, she says, "Arlene is the only person I know who acts as though life were the best party she ever attended."
That was very sweet.
Is that right, Arlene?
Yes, somebody did say that, and it was darling of them. I like it.
Well, I think we'll leave on that charming note. I want to thank you so much for keeping in touch.
Thank you, George. It's always good to see you.
Thank you so much. Arlene Francis, good night.
Good night.